I'm actually very, very happy to use the label of being deaf. Now, socially, people really react against even admitting something like that. But, it's a label. I'm very happy to wear it, and I'm very happy to share it.
You're listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hello, No Labels, No Limits podcast listeners. It's Sarah Box, your host. Welcome back to another episode of the No Labels, No Limits podcast. We are here to inspire you to break free from limiting beliefs and think outside the box, whether you are a solopreneur, part of a team, not working, or trying to drive change and live fully in other aspects of your life. And today our guest is going to help us learn more about that. We're going to be joined by Dr. Robin Hills. Now, he is a pioneering business psychologist and the force behind IE for Change. Dr. Robin specializes in emotional intelligence, which is a crucial tool for personal and professional growth. And for his significant contributions to the field, he's been awarded an honorary doctorate in advanced studies in psychology. So he's a dedicated professional and practitioner in that. So surprisingly, though, despite his profound expertise, he only encountered TV for the first time at age 10, growing up in a place where listening, not watching, was how one learned about the world. And he has a background that no doubt enriched his understanding of emotional intelligence. And I have some thoughts or questions to ask him about that, starting interfacing with the world through his ears rather than his eyes, whether that changes emotional intelligence or helps us integrate differently. But in this episode, we're going to unravel how emotional intelligence can transform our lives, from improving our decision-making and boosting our confidence to managing stress and fostering meaningful relationships. So get ready. I'm looking forward to learn how to leverage my emotions for sustainable success. And with that, let me formally welcome Dr. Robin Hills to the podcast. Good morning or good afternoon for you.
Sarah, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thanks for being a guest. And, this topic and your work, your research, your business, it's actually of profound importance in my life because I didn't even know what it was until maybe a decade or two ago. I understood some of the concepts, but as I came to learn more, I realized what a big impact emotional intelligence has on how we interact with the world and those around us. And I began to notice that those who think they're super duper smart but lack emotional intelligence struggle. So could we start by first telling us why is it important that you and I are here today discussing this topic?
Well, I think you've already answered that question so eloquently in terms of the introduction. You've explained the importance of emotional intelligence, and we can certainly explore that in a lot more detail. But I feel that we're here at the right time, at the right place, really, to give your listeners more insights into what emotional intelligence is, why it's so important, and why they should consider looking and developing and adapting around their emotional intelligence.
Okay, so let's start there. Could you share a story from your early career that highlights maybe a pivotal moment when you recognized the power of emotional intelligence?
Sure. I'd like to pick up on something that you said. You said you weren't aware of emotional intelligence until about a decade or two ago. I don't think I was aware of emotional intelligence until about a decade or two ago. It wasn't until Daniel Goldman published his books on the topic in the mid-90s that brought the topic of emotional intelligence to the public consciousness. Now, I read one of the reviews of his book in the newspaper and had a light bulb moment thinking, aha, this is giving me an explanation around why some people react in certain circumstances, and exactly the same circumstances gets a completely different reaction from another person. They're all very intelligent, as you've said, but they don't react in the same way. What is going on? And the reason why they're not reacting the same way is the fact that they're actually interpreting and utilizing their emotions in a different way. No right or wrong, it's what's right for them. And to go back to answer your question, I'll give you a story around my career. I started in medical sales within the pharmaceutical industry. And I was working in the London teaching hospitals. And I noticed that some doctors were incredibly stressed. They had very little time for their patients, certainly very little time for me. And they had a terrible time in terms of actually doing the work because of this. And then somebody else would come in and do exactly the same job, exactly the same role, in exactly the same team. And they weren't so stressed. They had time for their patients. They would sit down, talk with them. They'd sit down and talk to me. They had time really for everybody within the team. What was the difference? At the time, I didn't know, but with a degree of hindsight, we now know it's emotional intelligence.
So what was the difference between, like looking back and taking those as a miniature case example, from the first one you described that had no time, and the second one who did have time, given that their circumstances were mostly the same, roles and what was happening, hospital stuff is hospital stuff. It never really gets home. What is the emotional intelligence, or do you call it emotional intelligence or IQ?
Yes.
Okay.
I call it emotional intelligence. A lot of people will try and abbreviate it as EQ, and they think they're being very smart doing that. But it's not.
Let's go with emotional intelligence.
It's EI. It's EI. We can come back and talk about the difference in terms of abbreviations later if appropriate.
Okay.
But to answer your question around emotional intelligence, what was happening is that they weren't controlling their emotions. They weren't necessarily being aware of their emotions, and they weren't. A lot of them didn't have self-awareness, which is a key component of emotional intelligence. So without a level of emotional intelligence, without that self-awareness, they weren't able to control their emotions appropriately. And through that, they weren't then able to utilize their social skills and build up relationships appropriately.
So how might Dr. A have done better with his emotions than Dr. B in the example that you gave? Because we can talk about being self-aware, and people ask, do you feel you're self-aware? Yes, but how do you know? That's really a subjective question unless you've done study or gone through some work to go, oh, I get it now. So if you just ask me generally or other people generally, I think most people think they are pretty self-aware, but clearly we are not as self-aware as we might think we are.
I think you're absolutely right. And if anybody was to ask me if I've got self-awareness, I would say, well, yes, but there's always room for improvement. I could always learn more. And I think the important thing there is, how do people respond to feedback? Have they got the self-awareness? Have they got the maturity, the emotional maturity, to be able to listen, comprehend, understand, and care about the impact that they have on other people? Or are they so self-centered and selfish that they think everything needs to revolve around them and everybody has to adapt around them? Now, in terms of giving people self-awareness, you and I would do that in terms of sitting down, coaching them, and utilizing some tools to have a discussion around what their strengths are. And I know you're a great fan of using the Enneagram. I use Myers-Briggs type indicator.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
both of them are extremely valuable coaching tools to help people with self-awareness.
They're good starting points, I think.
Okay.
They are non-judgmental. I think that's the thing. I think people really resist. I have found, I make these global statements as if they're true. I have found that oftentimes people resist doing that type of work or introspection because they don't want to be judged harshly for what we all have, which are human frailties.
They might not like what they hear. I think that's the problem.
Well, we don't always like. I mean, when I got my Enneagram, when I got my Myers-Briggs was enlightening for me because first of all, I didn't know what it was, and I thought I did it because it was required from a college class. You have to take this, and then I shared it with a therapist, and I said, "This just can't be right." He was really good. He says, "Okay, tell me why." So I'm telling him. He goes, "I said, well, it says I'm introverted and all this stuff." He goes, "Let's look at the definition." And it was uncomfortable for me. But then I realized it explained a lot. It explained exactly why I'd had trouble in some relationships, like business relationship or friend relationships, because I would just retreat, right? And Enneagram, all that did was put another layer on it and go, that's your default. You need to focus on that. So it was one of those things, someone that describes it as being cringeworthy. It's like you get that information about yourself, but internally you're going, that rings as true, but it's still a wee bit cringeworthy. So then it takes courage to go further and explore that. So how do you help people do that?
Well, very much in the way in which you described. A lot of it is coaching people, helping them to understand themselves better, going to places that they don't want to visit within themselves, and having a conversation around it. Now, I think it's vitally important for us to say to your listeners that the name of this podcast is No Labels, No Limits. And what people don't like about Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram is they feel that it puts them into a box. And by putting them into a box, we're labeling them. And that's not the case with either of these tools. What they do is they provide information, they provide data around preferences, and we're all individuals. So yes, I sit in the ENFP box of the Myers-Briggs, and I'm quite happy and quite comfortable there. But there are times when I don't use those preferences because it's more appropriate for me to use different preferences. And then when I feel comfortable, I go back in my box. So I don't have a big label on my head, ENFP tattooed there, and you don't have whatever tattooed on.
INTP.
INTP. You don't have that label, but it gives you some insights around who you are, what you are, and how you engage with the world and how you engage with other people. Yeah. That's the importance of the exploration, not letters.
I agree.
Of the Enneagram.
And I do recognize the irony of having my podcast be called No Labels, No Limits, and then talk about this. But I actually mean because it doesn't matter where we are, we're not constrained there.
That's right. That's exactly it. And Myers-Briggs and Enneagram are both very freeing tools because they give you permission to be.
Yes, they do. But I want to go back to something because you talk about, and I mentioned in the introduction, that you weren't really engaging with television. You experienced the world through your ears. And then we talk about emotional intelligence and self-awareness. And you talk some about like our little doctor who thought everything was about him, right? And couldn't handle it when things didn't go his way. Is there some connection between all of that and the work you've done and what you see in terms of how we intake stuff and how it influences us and our listening ability?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I think you've talked about a little doctor. I think some of the big, very senior doctors have that problem. And I think that a lot of them think, and again, you said this in the introduction, that because they've got very high IQ, they have this ability to automatically have high levels of EQ EQ being emotional quotient, the measure of emotional intelligence. So they think that the two are synonymous, and they're not correlated. So if you have high IQ, you don't necessarily have high EQ. I think a lot of senior clinicians are, I've got to be very, very careful because I'm kind of labeling them now, have a level of arrogance which suggests that they are so good at what they do, and they've got a lot of people around them telling them how good they are, that equates to every aspect of life and all walks of life. And I think they have a very humbling experience when they find out that that's not the case. But to go back to what you were asking about with regards to how we perceive and how we take in information, we all take in and perceive information in different ways. And a lot of that is down to the fact that your brain, Sarah, is different from my brain. And your experience of the world and your memories are different from mine. And I've been married for over 40 years now, live very, very closely with my wife. Her brain is different from mine in many, many ways. We've shared a lot together. We've got a lot of memories together. We've had a lot of good times. We've had our ups and downs. But despite that, our brains are completely different. They will always will be. So the thing is, we do take in information and process it in our own way. What we perceive is right for us. Now, the big assumption that most people make is that what they perceive, because it's right for them, it's right for everybody, and this is how it has to be. So I take in a lot of information, as you said, through my ears. The big problem with my ears is that they don't work properly. I am actually moderately deaf to the point where I wear hearing aids. I'm wearing my headset today, so it's all nicely balanced for my hearing loss. In other words, the left ear is louder than the right ear, and I've positioned it accordingly. But I lost my hearing in my 20s. That's almost, well, it is 40 years plus ago. I didn't know. I didn't officially find out until I was in my mid-50s. So
all that time you thought that was normal?
All that time, well, it is normal. It's normal for me.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, all that time, I was having to compensate for the fact that I wasn't hearing things as well as a normal hearing person, if I could put that label on them. So what I was actually doing was compensating that by looking at people when I'm talking to them. I can't lip read, but I need to look at the movement of the lips to interpret what it is that they're saying. And a lot of people will then say to me, "Oh, Robin, you're very empathetic. You're a good listener, aren't you?" No, not really. But, if that's what they think, that's great. But a lot of it is just learnt behavior based around the fact that I've got this inherent inability to hear as well as I could do. Now, it's not a problem. If anything, I've converted it into a kind of superpower. So I'm quite happy to talk about the fact that I can't hear properly. So, I just have to work around it. I wear hearing aids if I'm in a very loud environment. It hurts. I can't hear people. I have learned a very, very useful expression, which I'll share with you and your listeners.
Please do.
Because it works brilliantly, but so many people just never, ever say this. It's as simple as saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat it?" Because a lot of people will just say, "You're not speaking properly. You're mumbling. It's too loud. you're not talking to me correctly. It's their problem. Well, it's not. It's my problem. I can't hear. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that, please? And you'd be surprised. A lot of people then actually slow down, calm down, and repeat what they say. And they may even slightly change what they say in order to give me a better understanding. And it helps with their thinking.
It does help with the thinking. I'm only laughing because for people who've been married a long time, that starts happening. It's like, what? Partly because you're not listening or paying attention, but also because the hearing changes, and you say people get annoyed. And then all of a sudden for me, my husband does that to me all the time. What? I'm thinking we need to get our hearing checked. But I just start laughing. I'm thinking, maybe I'm not enunciating. He goes, I think you're mumbling. Okay, honey, what about this? And because you get lazy, you don't enunciate.
Yeah.
But to your point, that is kind of a superpower when you can just be honest, right? I didn't hear you. Could you repeat yourself? On the flip side of that, I know for me, I have a number of folks who have hearing loss, some minor, some major, but it's made me much more aware of when we just go out to socialize where we go, because background noise is a problem. And so it means I can choose to be in a noisy place, and they have trouble even with all the tech that can adjust things. But I just love what you said. Could you repeat yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because, yes, I do wear hearing aids when I go out, and the tech is there to try and help. But what it does is the hearing aids have got a microphone, and all they do is they just raise the volume of everything. Now, what a normal person, I was going to say you there, Sarah, making an assumption, and I'm assuming that you are a normally hearing person, but what a normal hearing person is able to do in a very loud environment is to be able to pick out the voice that they want to hear and suppress all the background noise. Now, that's part of the way in which the brain operates. I can't do that when I'm wearing my hearing aids, because all the hearing aids do is raise the volume of everything. So I can still hear the voice, but I can still hear all the noise that's going on around me. And it's very, very hard. And it actually can be quite painful at times.
I would think so, because just even when things get noisy for me, and I'm not going to tell you I have normal hearing because I'm not sure I do. I may be compensating. But when it gets noisy for me, it is harsh. I mean, I start experiencing the environment harsh, and then my nervous system kicks in a bit. It's like I can just feel my, I don't want to say which hormones and all that stuff, but I can feel the energy coming up, so I'm less relaxed. But I do like what you said, that you pay more attention to the lips, even though you're not lip reading, and the facial, so you're getting cues that way. Because I remember going in, I had to recertify for something and take all my documents in during COVID for something. And I'm looking at this gal behind the glass. She was projecting. I could hear the volume clearly. And I just started laughing. I said, I did not understand a thing you said. She goes, I hate wearing a mask. You don't know how many people rely on watching faces to actually get what is being said. And it was like this light bulb moment for me, that we all to some degree are watching those cues, some more than others for what's going on with the lips.
Yes, so I've got a really interesting story for you,
Go ahead.
Listeners. I was doing some work in Riyadh at one of the major banks. Now, Riyadh, for those who don't remember, is the capital of Saudi Arabia. And I was training 20 to 30 young female bankers in the topic of emotional intelligence. Now, they all came in wearing their hijab. So, of course, all I got was their eyes to look at. And whenever they spoke to me, I found some of them very, very, very difficult to hear. Now, being respectful to them, I did say to them, look, I really am very interested in hearing what it is that you say. But the very fact that I'm deaf and you're talking through a piece of cloth, you're taking out one of the communication channels. I do not want you to remove your clothing. I want you just to be consciously aware of the fact that it's going to come through muffled. and I'm not going to be able to hear it as well as I possibly could because of my deafness. So whenever any of them spoke, I then walked towards them and I would actually ask them to repeat to make sure that I got it. And sometimes it was still incredibly difficult because the sound was muffled and I hadn't got the lips to work with. But the training course went off really, really well, and I was very, very pleased with it. But again, it's a case of being respectful, and it's also a case of being honest.
Yes, and you could have anticipated that in advance necessarily. The degree to which it might be difficult.
That's right, and I think we've got to be aware of people's different cultural preferences and work around that. So as I say, I'm not insistent on them changing their cultural habits because of me, but they need to be aware of the fact that it is going to have an impact on me, and I have to compensate around that.
I just think about the gift you gave also from being who you were, because it is not going to be missed on them that there are other people in their lives with hearing lost or diminished hearing who may be suffering from that same challenge with them, and they don't know, right? But maybe someone's too polite to say, I didn't get a thing you said. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to embarrass you. And yet now they have an awareness that, wow, for someone who might not hear well, this could be challenging. And I might, as the speaker behind the cloth, ask the question, was that clear? Did you understand what I said? There's just that awareness of others that regardless on what side of the challenge we're on, is helpful for us to just be aware of it.
It's an equality, diversity, and inclusion issue alongside all of the other things that most people consider. And I'll just go back again to the title of your podcast, No Labels, No Limits. I'm actually very, very happy to use the label of being deaf. Now, socially, people really react against even admitting something like that. But, it's a label. I'm very happy to wear it, and I'm very happy to share it.
Well, it opens a door for other people who may be less comfortable doing it or might be shy, to just say, well, look at him. He's totally cool. He's good with it. He's having a great life. Okay, I can do that. I know I admire when people do things I might have been timid about doing, and it's no big deal then. It's kind of, oh, I've been putting more on this, and it's stressing me out more than anybody. Okay. So you have one more story for us.
Yes, I was mentoring a deaf lad from my local town, Bolton. I've been mentoring for a local charity for the last 7 years. And I was given this young lad to mentor, and we were matched together. And the organization that matched the two of us together didn't realize that I'm deaf. So the two of us got together and had some great times. We went out for coffee, we played bowls, we went and played games, we went for walks. We did a load of things together as we were, as I was mentoring him, just being a friend to him. Now, the interesting thing is he goes to a deaf school, and he was a little bit embarrassed about his deafness. But in the 2 years that I worked with him, meeting him every fortnight or so, we've actually broken down that perception of deafness. And he now sees it very much as a superpower. Now, what he actually could do, which is what I couldn't do, is he could sign. He was absolutely brilliant, or he is absolutely brilliant at signing. And I've learned a lot about sign language through that. British Sign Language is completely different from American Sign Language. Now, you would think that because we're speaking the same word and we can understand each other, so I don't have to translate what you're saying, Sarah, or translate what I'm saying so that you can understand it, Sarah. If we were signing, it would be a completely different matter. Now, he, like most of the young people these days, is very interested and loves rap music. So I was driving along with him in the car, and he'd been playing some of this rap music, which is full of swear words. And what I would actually say to him is, "Oh, what's that word that's been blacked out? I don't think I heard that." And he would either very embarrassingly tell me, "Oh, what does that mean?" Or what he would do is he would try and change the subject. But the interesting thing that I did ask him is, okay, can you sign that? And he said, no, what we would have to do if I was signing it, I would actually have to spell it out. So there isn't an actual word in sign language for one of these swear words. But if he was actually signing along with the piece of music, they'd actually have to very, very quickly spell out what the word was. I just thought your listeners might be interested in hearing that.
I think that's brilliant, because we don't realize that, and think about it, he's trying to keep a beat or a cadence if he's rapping. It's really hard to like pause long enough to do all the letters, right? Versus words. So what a great thing. I would encourage folks to think about that. I've done some work with non-hearing communities. It has changed how I think about communicating, especially when I know someone's having to interpret me for signing, and how tiring that is for the person. And then kind of how lazy it is, because I just get to speak and it has to be interpreted for the other person instead of vice versa. And so now I have to think about, do you abbreviate it? So English Sign Language means British Sign Language?
I don't know, but BSL, which is British Sign Language, is completely different from ASL,
which is American.
Yeah, and
aren't we
there
centric?
Well, I think the other interesting thing is that each language has its own level of sign language. So Australian Sign Language is different. And again, we're all speaking English words in the same way, but Australian Sign Language is a different set of signs. Now, the other thing that I found was very, very interesting, across the North African and Middle Eastern tranche that takes us into Asia, Arabic Sign Language, people from Morocco can interpret people from Syria through using their language. So there may be miles of difference, but what I've been told is that there is that commonality in Africa, in Arabian Sign Language. Again, it's a whole new area that's open to us. And one other thing that I will share that I found absolutely fascinating working with my young mentee is that he's taking exams, his what we call GCSEs here in the United Kingdom this year or next year as it is. What they actually have to do is they actually have to put them into rooms, windowless rooms, and they have to sit back to back in order to answer their exam questions, because otherwise they can sign the answers to each other.
Oh, things you never think about.
No, absolutely fascinating.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, the other brilliant superpower that he got is when I picked him up from school one day, his friend was being driven out of the car park in a vehicle, and the two of them were able to communicate to each other through sign language. Now, a normal hearing person couldn't do that because there's the glass of the vehicle in the way. But the two of them were yards away from each other, out of earshot, and able to communicate using sign language. Absolutely wonderful what you learn about deafness when you start delving at a deeper level.
Well, and I would even go a little on to that, saying what we learn about one another when we spend time with one another, because had you not been in a mentee relationship with him, and I would offer that he was in a mentee relationship with you, because look how much you've grown, we just miss things that are really cool about other people, their internal culture, how they live, interpret and communicate. And so I love that story. I really
Yes,
do.
it's all making the assumption that our perception is not right. What is it that we're missing? And we need to go back to ask really good quality questions.
I'm right with you on that. Thanks again. But I want to circle back to emotional intelligence. You know, you
Sure.
mentioned doing the workshop with the women in Riyadh on emotional intelligence. Will you talk a little bit about actually how you work with companies and groups um, to help them grow in their emotional intelligence?
Oh, yes. I think it's a vital question, Sarah, because emotional intelligence underpins every facet of what it is that we do. So whether I'm working with people looking at their leadership, looking at their communication skills, looking at their collaboration skills, their team working skills, it's all around emotional intelligence. So when I'm running a workshop with people, I'll run a workshop over a period of a week to 2 weeks, and we barely scratch the surface of the construct. But what I do, to answer your question, is to help them to understand themselves better through elements of self-awareness, through elements of self-regulation, through elements of empathy, and help them to build up their social skills. And I do that through a range of different exercises. But I also help them to start to really think about emotions in a different way. Emotions are data. They provide us with information around our outside world, our outer world, and they provide us with information around how we psychologically and physiologically react to our environment. So the key to becoming emotionally intelligent is, how do you interpret this data and utilize the data in order to make better decisions and build up relationships. And I have a range of different exercises to help people explore that. But we actually break down emotions into a number of different, well, we have a number of different ways of looking at emotions to start with. I try to get people away from labeling emotions positive and negative, because emotions are not positive or negative. Data is not positive or negative. It's what you do with the data that becomes positive or negative. So helping people to understand that emotions are not positive or negative. Yeah, some emotions don't feel very pleasant, and some feel a lot better than others, and you would like those emotions. But how do you work with those emotions in a constructive way to build relationships and make better decisions, rather than in a destructive way to lower the relationship that you've got with the person and to make decisions that are not quite as good as they could be?
So let's dive into that a little bit more, if you will. Just pick a situation or an emotion or emotional reaction and walk us through how we might work with that more constructively, whether it's just within ourselves so that our experience is more our choice rather than reactive. I may not be using the words you would use, but that's
No, that's fine. That's
okay.
fine. That's a really good question. And let's take 2 or 3 emotions. Let's take 2 or 3 of the basic emotions and look at them in a little bit more detail. Let's look at fear, for example. Many people are fearful in the work environment because the leader or the manager is extremely angry all the time. Now, the leader may then say, "Oh, I want all of my people to be happy," but they're not actually creating the right environment for happiness to prevail. They're creating an environment of fear. Now, fear is often labeled a negative emotion, but if fear is such a negative emotion, why do we get such joy from going on roller coasters? And why do we get such joy from watching scary films? So what we've got to do is to look at fear and understand why we fear fear, what it is that drives our fear. It's really a situation where we don't know what the future holds, or we don't know how people are going to react. And so what we are doing is preparing ourselves mentally and physically to react in an appropriate way. Prolonged fear leads to intense stress. So that's a destructive use of fear. But a constructive use of fear is keeping yourself alert for any dangers that may arise in order that you can react as quickly as you possibly can and do what is appropriate. I'll move on to talk about another emotion that's often labeled as negative, anger. Now, we all feel angry at times. There are things that we don't like. Anger is an extremely good emotion because it tells us that something or somebody is violating our principles, our values. So how we react to the anger will then drive a positive or negative set of behaviors. Anger is a good emotion for righting a wrong. If Nelson Mandela had not been angry, he wouldn't have changed South Africa into what it is today. So that is a laser-sharp focus of anger. It was a blunderbuss in his early years, but he learned to use it in an appropriate way. And anger, I think a lot of people just tend to react to something very, very angrily, and they will say inappropriate things and regret what they have said. And that's a destructive use of that emotion that we should watch out for. And then I'm going to take a final emotion for us to look at, that emotion of happiness. And everybody looks at happiness as being a positive emotion. Well, again, it feels very pleasant, but happiness is an inappropriate emotion to share at a funeral or a solemn occasion. So you actually have to temper your happiness, if that's indeed what you're feeling, according to the situation. Happiness at times will mean that we're oblivious to taking risks, or oblivious to dangers, and we'll take more risks. And then there are some people who are so deliriously happy, you can't communicate with them. So what we've got to do is to look at getting the balance right with all of these emotions. Now that's three. That's three. It depends upon what paper you read. As humans, we experience anything between about 3,000 and 27,000 emotions. So let's have a look at making it a lot simpler. And the best way to do that is, what am I feeling at the moment? Does it feel good? Doesn't it? How am I going to use my emotional state to build up relationships, make better decisions, and use it constructively? It might not feel good, but what am I going to do about it?
That's brilliant. Now, when you're working with folks, do you also, so I'm asking myself, how do I feel, like, what emotion am I experiencing? Becoming aware of what that is. And I remember being asked that way back and thinking, well, I don't know, right? I'm just doing life. And when I started being aware of what the emotion was, the next step was like, where am I feeling it? Like, so that I can be aware, maybe even before my brain's engaged, like if my stomach's clenching, what's it telling me about something? Like, is there a warning signal? Do you connect the emotion with the emotional body or the body in any way in your work? That part of emotional intelligence?
Yes. I think when we look at neuroscience as a topic, most people will very naively think of it as being just around the brain. But we're not brains on sticks. We're brains which has a body in which to express what the brain is experiencing. So we also have other brains throughout the body, if we can call them as such. We've got a neural network around the heart. We've also got a neural network around the gut, around the lower part of the alimentary tract canal. And these send signals up to the brain, and the brain interprets that as well. So if you are getting a feeling right in the pit of your stomach, what is it telling your brain? You hopefully don't get too much of a feeling around the heart, because that might be leading to other
That's a
things.
different message.
It is. But if we look at the heart as providing us with emotional information, does this feel good? Does it feel right? Does it sit with my values? Do I feel comfortable with it? I can feel it in my heart. Do I love this? Is this causing me to feel awkward, anxious? That's a really good message that the heart will tell the brain. And then the stomach is just a little bit more black and white, on and off. It's almost a case of yes or no, do it or don't do it. And also, I think we've got to look at the stomach. It will actually inform the brain intuitively that something's not quite right. And then it requires the heart and the brain to click together to find out what the issue is.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I was told that was by a GI doctor. And he said, no, your gut it's got its own brain. And I'm thinking, okay, are you trying to convince me about something? I thought it was trying to convince me of a point of view so that I might understand something differently. But then I thought, okay, I really like this guy. He knows his stuff. I'm going to read on this. And I was amazed. He says it's fast, Sarah. It's faster than you would recognize, like your thought process. The gut will send a message to the brain fast. And then you'll start to notice it elsewhere. And it was amazing to learn about all these different networks in our body, Robin, and it was amazing. So I love that you do that also. So do you help folks when you're working with them in their businesses understand the complexity of all of these systems?
Yes, what really, really frustrates me and what really, really annoys me is the fact that most people are incredibly ignorant of their basic biology. Now, I think a lot of that is driven through my own background and experience, because I have a degree in biology and I'm absolutely passionate about the topic. But when you talk about some of these basics, people are not even aware of it. It's just very, very odd. So what I do is I bring an understanding of the human body into the work that I do. But, and it's a big but, I've got to make sure that people understand it because they can apply it and it makes a difference in their work. So the complex morphology of the brain and the various labels of various parts of the brain are not important. People don't need to know that. What they need to know is some very, very basics around the brain and what the various bits of the brain will do. But anything beyond that, is it going to be helpful to them in business? If the answer is no, then let's not even go there. If the answer is yes, then right, let's build upon it. Let's give people a better understanding and then let's help them to work with it and apply it.
It's like you said, though, with in the instance, there's a leader who wants everybody to be happy, but what people are experiencing in the environment is fear, right? They never know what to expect. It's an explosive leader. In that case, I mean, that really is a biology thing too, because we're picking up on things that are not even on the surface. Sometimes, people they go, this is not safe. I'm not speaking up. And if you ask them to actually list why, sometimes they can have a hard time doing that. It's just a matter of, I just know. I might not have a concrete example, but I guarantee you I can feel it's not safe. And maybe they've watched other people not have a good outcome for it. So I do think that having at least a basic understanding of what we're set off in our environments on an emotional level. I joke that my goal in life is, John Muir, leave everything better than you encountered it, basically, in a naturalist way. I just think about that in an emotional way. Do not leave trash where you go. Don't wreck other people's emotional experiences by being ignorant of what I'm doing. So I do think I'm super excited that you actually bring that into your work and help people understand that it's not just self-awareness alone that's having an effect, but also it helps us individually when we know some of the basics.
Yes, it's all about, and like I say, it's having a basic understanding. It's the fact that the heart will beat faster. It's the fact that there's certain dilation of the blood vessels, which leads to different tonalities in the skin. It's also about the way in which the acid levels change within the stomach. It's the way in which the blood flows to the muscles. All of these are vitally important because if people are experiencing fear, they are experiencing a set of physiological reactions to that fear, which, if they are prolonged, will cause intense problems for the future. Higher levels of certain hormones, which lead to all these physiological changes. That leads to stress, and that then ultimately leads to a health problem. So this is what I say when I go back to what I said around the fact that people are incredibly ignorant of basic biology. You've only got one body. It's yours. It's your responsibility to look after it. Nobody else can drink that cup of coffee for you. Nobody else can eat healthily for you. Nobody else can go to the toilet for you. You can't delegate these things. Just look after yourself.
No matter how much you'd like to.
Yeah, look after yourself. Make sure that you're fit for purpose, mentally and physically.
Yeah. And I want to bring this in to ask you, as we look forward and the role of emotional intelligence in the workplace, in our general language, how we talk and think about things, what do you see that going forward? Because we talk about back in the 90s, right? You'd think that's been forever, but it's not that long ago that this really started to surface, thank you, Daniel Goleman. But what do you see the role of it as we have this increasing digital communications, distributed workplaces, and sometimes a fractional view of our world?
I think emotional intelligence is going to become recognized as being more and more important. People are now a little bit more comfortable talking about emotions, and they see emotions as having a place in business in an appropriate way. So rather than people being labeled as emotional, they are actually being recognized as somebody who expresses their emotions probably in an inappropriate way, but that everybody feels things and experiences emotions. How can they put them to good use? And the message that I want to leave out there is that emotions contain data. It's your intelligence which will help you to interpret this data. And through that interpretation, you can improve the decisions that you make and build up better relationships and take the action that you need in order for you to improve your performance.
So, Dr. Robin, you have on your website, if I'm not mistaken, that you have some online courses that you offer. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I've just completed my 41st course today. I will be publishing that in the next week. Well, this is it. This is it. I've been working on them for the last 10 to 12 years, so it's my lifetime's work.
Talk a little bit about the range of those courses and where you, like, if someone for the first time is just hearing about this work, or maybe someone's heard about it but waited to learn more, where would you suggest they begin this journey if they go to your website?
Well, I think if they go to the website, there's a very comprehensive but very basic course, Introduction to Emotional Intelligence, which will help people to understand what the construct is and why it's important. And then based upon what they learn from that, they can learn more about self-awareness, self-perception, emotions, emotional regulation, relationships, Motivation, they can learn about collaboration, teamwork.
So it's a long list.
It's a whole long list. I think the important thing is let people go along, have a look at it, see what they like. If they do like it, sign up for it. And if you don't want to spend any money, there's a free book that you can sign up for when you hit the website, because it will ping up and ask if you're interested in signing up for it.
Sweet. Couldn't make it much easier than that. So for listeners, we will have all of Robin's links in the show notes. That's all you have to do. So that way you don't have to look, you don't have to stop what you're doing and write everything down. But his company is IE4, the number 4, change.
EI.
Oh boy, talk about dyslexia. EI, emotional intelligence, the number 4, change, but just the initial EI4, change. So, but all the links will be in the show notes for you. Robin, I'm going to give you the last words of the podcast as we go out of this episode before we leave. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, I'd like to leave you with the idea that you are responsible for your emotions. You're responsible for the expression of your emotions. You're responsible for your emotional intelligence. Remember that emotions provide you with data around your current situation. What is it telling you? And how do you use that data to build up relationships, make better decisions, and improve your performance? Thank you, Sarah.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic business coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Till next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.